Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to be covering some techniques for our paper sculpture project. And I just want to talk about some of the basics, go over different techniques that might help out your project. So let's go into our overhead camera view and talk a little bit about tools. So some things you're going to need to start out with: basic scissors. I recommend some sort of cutting blade. So we have a box cutter like this, which has a retractable blade. Okay, these are snap-off blades, so you can get sharper points for each time. It locks into place. Another great one is an X-Acto knife. So in this one, it's just a simple triangular blade. There we go. If it becomes dull, you can simply unscrew it here, and the blade can come out. There we go. It can come out and can go back in. And that provides you with a way of getting a sharp point every time. The key to cutting is a sharp blade. Additional supplies you may need: some sort of pencil. Highly recommend a ruler. Even if it's a plastic or wood ruler, it'll work fine. And some tape. And a little bit later, we'll talk about different gluing techniques and types of glues that you can use. So to start out with, let's talk a little bit about the type of paper. So for this paper sculpture project, we're going to be using just a single color, so just white paper, right? In your kit, you should have Bristol paper. This is a heavyweight, stiff cardstock type of paper, a little bit thicker than cardstock. That's great for structural elements. You also may use just some simple copy paper, which is far thinner but more flexible and can provide great textural elements or other additional features. So let's talk about cutting. The first thing I want to note is, always think about cutting down your stock to exactly what you need, not to waste paper. If you are going to be working with a specific size, I recommend, measuring your model, and we're talking about scaling the model up or scaling the model down, right? Shifting scale from a small object to a large object or vice versa. So if I start out by just cutting a strip, if I measure over an inch, always measure on two sides. So from the one edge, mark 1 inch, and over here again, I'll mark another 1 inch mark. I'll line my ruler up between those marks so the edge is directly on it. And whenever you're cutting, you want to cut, you don't have to cut all the way through. You can just make several passes. So here I'm tightening my blade, and I'm just going to go across once and twice and 3 times until it's fully clear. Okay. If you are too aggressive, you might move over your ruler and damage yourself. So be careful when you're cutting. Always be aware of where your hands are. All right, so this paper is great, and we can use it in different ways. Obviously, to create forms, we can start thinking about folding. A simple cylinder form could simply just be 2 tabs folded together to create some sort of circular form. If this is taller, it can create a tube. It also is fairly strong, so we could set something on top of it. And if we wanted to start to fold this, you could think about it a few ways as well. So we could simply just take this and bend it over, line up the edges, score it back, and kind of draw an edge. I'm using my fingernail here to make it nice and clean. And then I have a folded form. So this is also a great way of making a mark and can be very strong as well. It can hold weight. It can assemble together to create other forms. So now my cylinder is a bit more of a teardrop because of that single form. Where's the camera? There we go. Okay. Another way of folding would be scoring. So a couple ways to score. I'm going to pause just for a second here. Okay, I'm back. Scoring is when we make a slight indentation into the paper, and that allows us to fold. So this is a tool called a bone folder, which bookmakers use to fold pages with. If I were to simply line this up, I can use the little edge here that's already been created for my fold and just run this across it a few times. I don't know if I can see this, the camera can see. It's a little too bright. Oh, well, if I feel it, there's a little indentation here. And because of that indentation, I can bend this right along that seam and create a really nice folded edge, right? So here now we have more of a triangular structure, which could again be a great form, have some sort of structure to it. And then finally, another way of scoring would be if you were to take your ruler, line this up, mark it here, okay? And you could draw a line if you want to. I could take my blade and ever so slightly, and not pressing down hardly at all, I just want to break the surface of the top of the page. And this really only works with a heavy cardstock paper. Once it's broken, I can see the tiniest little line there. And if I bend it, I get that edge to appear. There we go. You can see right along that edge. So now I have 4 corners that if I continued this, I could create like a box form, right? So scoring can be a great way of folding. Typically what I do is I'll score on the inside and then fold to the outside. That way that score mark isn't apparent, right? It sort of bends it over. If I do it the other way, then you might open up the surface of this and start to see some of the paper pulp coming through. So again, score on the inside to sort of create that fold. Now I'm just gonna make one more final score mark here. And let's just do this with the blade again. Okay, I've got one last fold. There we go. I've got 4 corners now and another little piece. Now these overlaps are good because you can imagine gluing one tab to the next to make some sort of box-like form. We don't necessarily need that much though. Oftentimes what you see in paper models will be a simple tab. And a tab would be if we were to cut off this edge a little bit like this, okay? And then also make these corners a little triangular like this. We have a little tab, right? And the tab then, when you fold it, can go right underneath here to glue to create this form to come together. So on the inside, you can see just that little bit of information. On the outside, we can create a nice sharp edge line. Let's get in the shadow here. There we go. A nice sharp edge line that we can glue to. So I'm going to pause and get some glue and we'll talk about that. Okay, we've got our little object. We're going to fold it up and glue it together. Let's talk a little bit about glue. So a couple of different options would be glue stick. So this works pretty good for thin papers, for light application. It could work for this. I would have to hold it for a little bit to make sure it's tight enough. But I think that this is probably not the best choice for gluing this structural element. Again, for surface pieces, for thin copy paper, for things like that, glue stick works great. Flat on flat is what this is really used for. And then the other standby would be the Elmer's glue, the white all-purpose glue. This works great. Saturates the surface, and if you hold it together, it can be really strong. Other options would be something like Sobo glue, which is a little bit stronger. Same sort of principle, a white glue. And then the one that's sort of quick and strong would be a little hot glue gun. So this is just a simple craft glue gun. You can get it at most stores, anything from hardware stores to Target, Walmart, dollar stores have them. You can find them anywhere. I think this was like $5 with a few glue sticks. This can come in really handy. For white glue, all you need to do for something like this is just simply, let's see if this stuff is clogged or not. In my house, they're always clogged up. So we'd get a little bit of glue on here, just a little bit on the surface. You don't want to flood it. All right, I just put a little bit of a tab on there. I don't know if we can see it or not. There we go, just a little bit of glue, like less than a pea. Just like a little drop of it there. And then I'm just going to put this together, line up the edge. You have a little bit of time to move it around before it sets. Then you just want to hold it for a few, so it really sets up and dries. Now this, again, is a little bit longer process. I'm going to have to hold this for a little bit until it's nice and strong to be able to dry. Another option you could do, if you're careful, is if you're waiting for it to dry and you can work around it, you can take a little piece of blue tape. All right, and I'm just going to rip this off, little piece of blue tape, and I'll just put this on here, and that will hold this while it dries, and then I can peel it off. Right. So that is definitely an option. Hot glue, though, is really fast. So if I was going to make something like a little tube by just simply gluing these two things together, what I could do would be, and this is hot, so you have to be careful, put a little tab of glue on here, you do have a little bit of working time. If it starts to turn from translucent to opaque, then you know it's starting to dry. But what I can do then is line this up. You do have a little bit of time to work. You can, if you're careful, you can pinch this tight too. I'm feeling the heat through it, so I'm just going to move my fingers around. But this, as soon as it dries, as soon as it cools essentially, and already it's pretty strong, will give you a nice object to work with, right? Now, if we were to think about attaching these two things together, we'd have to do a little bit of engineering, right? So for this to connect to this, let's say, in this sort of orientation, we would need something to glue to. To try to glue an edge like this to a surface is not going to be very strong. So in the next section, we're going to talk a little bit about different connecting techniques, different ways of folding and scoring to sort of get things to fit together. But for this one, I really wanted to talk about different ways of cutting, different ways of trimming, and kind of working with those different forms. Once you have a form, obviously you can use different materials to shape it, add negative spaces. If we make a cut, we can fold, and this can give us more dimension and form, obviously. If we, add two cuts, we can create a little window tab. Something like this could be a great way of working and thinking about how these two things might connect. One tab fitting inside of another one could be a great way to fit these things together. I wouldn't recommend with a form like this to try to take like an X-Acto knife, for example, and cut into this, right? Because this is a little flimsy. You always want to cut onto a flat surface. If I'm working on the inside, I might be able to make a little score mark in here and make some edges and have that sort of thing come out. But again, try to avoid cutting directly into something without having a flat surface. You'll notice this mat that I have is a cutting mat. It's a self-healing cutting mat. But something as simple as a piece of old cardboard will work just fine for these techniques as well. All right, so in our next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about different ways of connecting. But in terms of gluing, this thing is probably ready to go. Yeah, it dries fairly fast. Once it's glued, you see the tab on the inside is nice and flat and clean. It's pretty strong. So you don't want to, I would let this dry for a little bit before I build more stuff on top of it. But for now, this is a really good bond. So the white glue works great for that. Hot glue can also work really great. Different cutting techniques as we go forward. All right. See you in a bit.